Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Formula 1 is officially back with bombshell cheating accusations back on the cast today. Reports have emerged this morning that one specific team, as speculated by many others in the sport, have been using a secret mechanism in the cockpit of their car to switch between low and higher ride height settings under parc fermé conditions. This would be explicitly prohibited in the F1 regulations and provide a major performance advantage over the course of a weekend, not having to compromise on setup as every other team would have to do. If this is true, which team could this be? Would it be an absolutely immense deal in the world of Formula 1, as all of these cheating accusations are as they come out in the sport? Absolutely it would. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. We're going to explain everything today as best as I possibly can. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Couple of quick things first of all. Liam Lawson wants to drive for Red Bull, obviously. Red Bull have told him that he can if he does well enough against Yuki. Lawson actually has made this quite clear. The conversations have always been in the direction of becoming a Red Bull driver in the future. That's what I have said to them. That's my goal. And their goal, I think, is to have drivers to replace current drivers in the future at some point. That's the goal. So, I'm sure that Sergio Perez won't be too happy reading this, but it is, not exactly incorrect from the Liam Lawson perspective. And Max Verstappen is still doing everything he can to hold on to this year's championship. Pretty funny that he made an interesting statement on Oscar Piastri, saying that, Piastri's far too good to be a number 2 driver. If I was him, I would never accept it. The full quote even goes into some further detail. It's pretty funny. He says, "For me, it's easy to talk, of course, because I've been in Formula 1 for 10 years. Max has been in F1 for 10 years. Kind of crazy how fast that time has flown. And it's Oscar's second season, so it's always harder to put your foot down. But he's a great F1 driver who doesn't deserve to give up wins and positions and play second fiddle because he has asked to." So, look, is he wrong? Maybe not. But, of course, Piastri is employed by McLaren to behave in McLaren's best interests. So, but Max will try his best to kind of whisper in Oscar's ear and say, look, you don't want to give up this position to Lando. No, come on. You want to win that Grand Prix. You want to make a statement and you want to help me win my championship. Now, this weekend in Austin, there are going to be big upgrades, not just to the cars, but also to the scrutineering in terms of whether one team especially, and this is the interesting part, it's quite clear from the reports that have come out that there is one team that is being scrutinized heavily, and many teams believe that is responsible for this. We don't yet know publicly who that team is, but of course we can speculate, and it's probably not Sauber, let's be honest. Ferrari are not going to bring a major upgrade this weekend. That is at least the rumour. They are going to try and just correlate their upgrades over the last couple of weekends. Haas do have a new front wing, although I'm not actually sure this is brand new. There's been some people saying that actually they debuted this one in Zandvoort a while ago, so it may not be a massive new part of an upgrade package, but there are teams, of course, bringing changes to their cars. And even McLaren, they reckon they've got more room for development. And this is why many people, following these rumours coming out today, are pointing the finger at McLaren. It's just because McLaren's car is very good right now, better than the rest of the field as it has been over the last few rounds. And yet McLaren are still saying, yeah, we can push the performance further. We've got upgrades in the works. We can get better and better and better. And the feeling is that McLaren, at least in their current performance levels, are not as close to their theoretical development ceiling as Red Bull seem to be. And maybe that's just McLaren have the better concept, or maybe there's something else going on. And Stella still says, yeah, McLaren, we're going to outdevelop everyone over the last 6 races of this season. That is their intention to do so. But let's dive into this car ride height adjustment trick under parc fermé conditions. This bombshell article drops relatively late UK time last night, and it was then followed up on this morning in a very interesting way that we shall dive into. The rumour is that one unidentified outfit may have found a clever way to adjust the front bib clearance, which we'll explain what that is in a second, between qualifying and the race. Sources have told Autosport that several F1 teams and the FIA have spoken about this in recent weeks. So this is coming out right before the weekend, on the return, effectively after the autumn break, as some people have been calling it, which raises major questions. If this weekend one of the front-running teams is not where we would expect them to be, then we have some serious questions things on our hands. And Planet F1 did a nice article here kind of explaining what these are, just so we can kind of look at what elements of the car are under scrutiny, and then what a certain team has potentially been doing with that element of the car. So the front bib, as it was there described, is also known as the T-tray on the car. And, well, you can see this on even old Formula 1 cars. This is a Toro Rosso from several years ago now. With this element under the floor, you can't really see it from when you look at a Formula 1 car normally. If you look at it from the side and from down low, you can see this element. Now, it used to be used effectively just to mount the plank to the floor of the car, but now it has more of an aerodynamic purpose because the floor is all of a sudden rather important. So that's kind of what the article describes, that it provided a mounting point for the plank on the floor, but since the reintroduction of ground effect, the car's floor has become the primary sort of downforce, and therefore the T-tray positioned well ahead of the car's underfloor tunnels greatly affects the airflow behind it and how it enters the tunnels. Some also call it a splitter, basically. So this element of the car is quite key, and if you can raise it or lower it, it's one of the things, because it's part of the suspension setup really, that the Formula 1 teams can do when they're setting up their car over the course of a weekend. We know that raising the ride height or lowering the ride height can be important in certain scenarios, especially when there are differences, as there always will be, between qualifying trim and race trim in terms of fuel load. In quali trim, it's absolute lowest fuel you can get away with. In race trim, at the start of a race, you're running on an absolute full tank. That affects what you've got to do with the ride heights, and you can change the T-tray setups in terms of how low or high it is. If you lower it, it's also going to lower the front wing level to potentially make it more efficient, but it might make running over the curbs harder because then the plank is closer to the grounds. So, you know, you've got to find a compromise. That's what Formula 1's about, finding a good compromise between a qualifying setup and a race setup. However, if you could change the setup of the T-tray and the suspension ride height in general, then you could theoretically get the best of both worlds, have the perfect setup for qualifying and the perfect setup for the race, whereas every other team is finding a compromise that will be able to do both. So this is the T-tray. This is a newer Aston Martin. You guys can't quite see it, but well, it is there. You guys can see what it looks like. And this is another kind of a render of what the T-tray currently looks like, which, as you can see, is more of a splitter, whereby the airflow is channeled into the Venturi tunnels through this part of the car. So the front bib, the T-tray, the splitter, whatever you want to say, that's what this element of the car is. That's what we're talking about here today. So Motorsport dropped the bombshell article yesterday, where they then say the following: sources have revealed that discussions have taken place in recent weeks over whether an unidentified team has found a way to change this around. Being able to raise and lower the bib, even by a small amount, between qualifying and the race would deliver a noticeable benefit in terms of perfecting the different ride height requirements between a low fuel single lap run and the needs for a heavier car over a race distance. But of course, as we know, this is not legal, obviously, because under parc fermé conditions, which come into place as soon as qualifying begins, through the whole of qualifying through the race, no changes can be made. You can only make front wing, flap level adjustments and change the tyre pressures. Outside of that, the setup you've chosen is the setup you have for the entirety of the race weekends. So making any changes there is very evidently a breach of the technical regulations. They even line it out right here. The aerodynamic setup of the front wing may be adjusted using the existing parts. No parts may be added, removed or replaced. A competitor may not modify any part of the car. So it must be clear from physical inspection that changes cannot be made without the use of tools, so that teams don't have devices that allow for easy modifications, and we'll get to that in a second. So there's been suspicions over the last couple of weeks behind the scenes that actually one team has designed its car in such a way that it's possible to adjust the clearance of the front bib, the T-tray, through a change of settings inside of the cockpit. Now, that is another point entirely, because it kind of implies the drivers may be responsible for this. Now, they do say that this alteration could be done by a mechanic during the car assessment work that happens after quali, when the car is meant to stay the same, but theoretically something could be done. And it would be absolutely fascinating if the drivers were involved in this as well. Like, could you imagine, like, that would implicate the drivers as well? if they were doing something to change the ride height, which they know is against the rules. Now, the team would know it's against the rules, which also should carry some sort of consequence. The difficulty of all these things is, how do you prove it? And how do we know which team might have actually done this? So the theory is that after qualifying, the mechanics would take the car around and they would, put some sort of tool, I don't know, into the cockpit and then twist a little button and it would raise the ride height or lower the ride height, whatever they were trying to do. And it seems like the teams have found out about this because all the teams and all the design details of all the cars have to be uploaded to the FIA servers on open source components, which all competitors have access to. So, the teams can see the design details of the other cars and they can kind of look and say, okay, well, they're doing this, they're doing that, and maybe there's a connection being made here that someone put two and two together. The FIA has taken on board these concerns of teams and has decided to take action where they will effectively mandate seals on any device that is used to alter the angle to effectively lock it in place so that nobody can change it going into the actual Grand Prix. An FIA spokesman actually talked about this and said, because sometimes they say, oh, there's nothing going on here, nothing to see here. But no, the FIA mentioned it and said any adjustment to the front bib clearance during parc fermé conditions is strictly prohibited. We have not received any indication of a team employing such a system. The FIA remains vigilant in our ongoing efforts to enhance the policing of the sport. This is what they always say. It's like, oh, we've not seen anyone use it, but it's like you won't have seen, like there's no evidence to confirm that it's being used. But there clearly is enough evidence that somebody has the potential to do this. And let's be honest, if someone has built a car with the ability to do this, do you think they're not doing it? I mean, this is Formula 1 at the end of the day. And it seems like most of the teams are pretty convinced that this is exactly what is going on. So then the FIA say, as part of this, we've implemented procedural adjustments to ensure that front bib clearance cannot be easily modified. In some cases, we may apply a seal, and, the revelation about a potential trick system in F1 comes ahead of an intense end of the season, especially if the chief protagonists might be implicated in these type of discussions. So then Jonathan Noble, Matt Summerfield come out with a further article kind of talking about this in a bit more detail, describing what might be done. The big question being asked by some squads in private is whether or not the damage has already been done. Has someone got away with doing something they believe was clearly outside of the regulations? The FIA say, well, we're not sure as of yet, but look, we know that this would make a major difference. They describe it in the article. Having the front bib clearance at the perfect height for both scenarios would give an advantage in terms of being able to take more curb in quali with no fear of damaging the floor or the plank, but then also ensure you've got the best possible aero setup for the race with the high, obviously, fuel loads in the car, and to ensure the tyres are being preserved in the best way possible. So, you would expect to see, if a team was doing this, excellent qualifying pace and then no disadvantages in terms of race trim as well. There is an interesting discussion, I think, that was mentioned further down. So you guys may remember, well, at least have heard the story about option 13 on the Benetton in 1994, where the car basically had launch control and there was a certain, series of button presses that the drivers, I think, could make in order to unlock option 13, which would enable launch control. And it was discovered by the FIA that there was a software hidden where option 13 was selected and available to be used. The problem is they could never prove that anyone had actually used it, despite the fact that the option existed. And also the option would mysteriously delete itself from the memory, I'm pretty sure, after the Grand Prix. So, it's just one of those things, isn't it? This is F1. But one F1 source suggested this is a similar scenario to what happened with Benetton in 94 over suspicions it was running a form of illegal launch control. The idea being that they look into it, no evidence can be found they actually used it in a race, and therefore no action is possible. It's like, this is the classic Formula 1 situation where you might well be cheating, but you can kind of get away with it because can they catch you cheating? If they can't catch you cheating, then have you really cheated? Well, yes, you have, but what are they going to do about it, right? So now the question is, who's done this, right? Who is responsible for these situations? And I think it's worth considering where we currently are in Formula 1. So obviously, people are going to be looking at the front runners, right? I mean, chiefly McLaren and Red Bull. Probably chiefly McLaren on this one, to be honest, right? Because, look, Red Bull, they started the season so well, then they fell off, and there were big questions as a result about the asymmetric braking stuff. Because we saw Verstappen, Perez struggle to handle the cars in the corners, talking about understeer, struggling with the brake balance and stuff like this. And if there was asymmetric braking being employed, it would explain some of those things and explain the half a second performance advantage that Red Bull have had over the field for, well, the entirety of 2023 and then going into some of 2024. We don't know if that was happening or not, but it, was a plausible explanation, even though everyone publicly has denied it, just because we saw the performance advantage that then seemingly disappeared. And look, back in the day when Mercedes were half a second lap quicker than anyone, that was explainable because they had an engine that was half a second lap quicker than anyone. It's not like their aero was that much better. When the aerodynamics appear to be so much better than the rivals, that's when there are serious questions raised because, these are the best engineers in the world working on all of these teams. If one team has such a substantial advantage, people are going to query, like, is that really feasible? Which is why people did with Red Bull, and is now why the same kind of thing is happening here with McLaren, right? Because they went from being substantially behind Red Bull at the start of the year to now substantially ahead. I mean, in Singapore, the McLaren of Lando Norris was basically a second lap quicker than Verstappen for the first stint. Like, I even mentioned in the video after the race, like, if I didn't know any better, I'd have said that there was some sort of, dodginess going on here with the McLaren. And you've also got to say from the McLaren side, they had that rear wing of Oscar Piastri's and Lando Norris's, but, the rear wing in Baku, which was flexing and like mini DRS, we talked about it, right? There were rumours from Red Bull and others that McLaren were using illegal cooling ducts in their front brakes to gain a performance advantage. So it's not like McLaren don't have a history themselves of pushing the rules as far as they possibly can. Like, we know that they do and they will. This is Formula 1 at the end of the day. So would it be impossible for McLaren also to have employed that to maintain a sizable advantage in qualifying trim and then also maintain a sizable race pace advantage and tyre degradation advantage? Sure. Or is their car just very good? That's also possible. Could it be Red Bull, another candidate, right? We also know that they like to skirt the boundaries of the rules of the top teams. Mercedes seems a bit less likely just because, if you were able to adjust the ride height of the car, then plank wear would never be an issue because you could always organize the ride height so that it wasn't a problem. And Mercedes, well, last year in 23, of course, what happened in Austin with the disqualification for the floor plank wear. But even this year, I think in Spa, when Russell's floor plank was wearing too much, they actually lost a bit of weight on that. That's kind of one of the reasons, at least, why he got disqualified from the Grand Prix, of course, Belgium this year. So it seems slightly less likely it's Mercedes. But it's Mercedes, it's quite embarrassing, to be honest, because, if you're going to be cheating to this extent, you might as well be good, right? Like, that would be the thinking. Maybe it's Ferrari, but again, maybe the same boat as Mercedes there on some level. There has been some speculation as to whether it's Williams, just because... And this would be an interesting one. I don't know what you guys' thoughts are in the comment section below. And maybe it's not. But this was the Spanish Grand Prix this year where Williams were atrocious, really. They were the slowest cars on the track. And then we fast forward to now. Williams, they've been scoring points. Baku, Singapore, like they're in and around the picture. It's not like they're rapid. But the Williams car, to be fair, has been, since a couple of recent upgrades, substantially better in qualifying and race pace than maybe you might expect. There could be more going on. I don't know. Intrigued to your thoughts as ever in the comment section below. So what do you guys think on this whole story, right? We know that cheating accusations will always go around in the world of Formula 1 and it's not going to go away anytime soon. But is it plausible that one of these cars in the picture, potentially the McLaren is the one that people are looking at, obviously for various reasons that we've discussed over the last few minutes here. And it's going to be a fascinating weekend. There's so many pieces to the puzzle though, because this weekend, McLaren may bring an upgrade or two. Red Bull are bringing a big package. Mercedes are bringing a big package, of course. So let's say McLaren go from being the fastest car for the final few rounds or for the last few races to then being, the fastest car marginally, or it's super tight at the front of the field and McLaren have no clear edge. Is that just the upgrade of the other teams worked? Or is that McLaren have taken a step back? But I think that will be the next step to see here, right? What happens now? Is this weekend's going to be quite telling? There have been a couple of technical directives that have come into effect over the last couple of seasons or so where certain teams have, on the weekend of their introduction, not seemed as good as we might expect them to be. Singapore Red Bull 2023 is one example, but then the next Grand Prix, they were right back to dominating again. So that is the debate really this weekend. Will we see evidence of this on track? Will one of the front-running teams be weaker than we expect? Because Austin is a relatively traditional track. Like, it has a good mix of higher speed, low low-speed corners, straight lines. Like, it is a circuit where if your car is quick, it will be quick, and there's usually a pretty sizable delta between the best and the worst around here because of all of the different corner profiles that are required to be good at in order to make it work. And of course, balance between quali and race is also very important. They've resurfaced the track, so floor wear, as it was for Mercedes and Ferrari last year, shouldn't be so much of an issue. But if McLaren go from being the fastest car to all of a sudden not, then that's going to raise questions. But also, let's say it's Red Bull hypothetically and Max still goes on to win this championship, then you've got the question as to, well, Max or Lando or whatever scored many of their points or race wins with what effectively amounts to an illegal car. Will anything be done about that? Well, that's a question for another day, but massively intrigued to your thoughts as ever in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.